New name tags.
I don't know, that one has character. You may want to keep.
Now you all know why the executive committee took so long. I just want to put that. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
Thank you, Mr. Wenzel. I appreciate that. Oh, Lord.
Charles City County, Ms. Johnson. Ms. Russell.
Present.
Town of Ashland, Ms. Abbott. Mr. McGraw.
Present.
Chesterfield County, Mr. Carroll.
Here.
Ms. Fry.
Here.
Thank you. Mr. Davy.
Here.
Ms. Haley. Mr. Holland. Mr. Engel.
Here.
Mr. Smith.
Here.
Vice Chair Winslow.
Here.
Henrico County, Mr. Baca.
Here.
Mr. Brannon. Mr. Mackey. Mr. Nelson. Ms. O'Bannon. Mr. Schmidt. Mr. Thornton. City of Richmond, Mr. Addison.
Here.
Mr. Giovia.
Here.
Mr. Jones. Ms. Lambert. Ms. Lynch. Dr. Newville.
Here.
Thank you. Mr. Poole. Ms. Robertson. New Kent County, Mr. Lockwood. Mr. Moyer.
Here.
Ms. Page. Thank you. Richland County, Ms. Lascalette. Chair Spoonhour.
Here.
PlanRVA County, Mr. Davis. Mr. Peterson.
Here.
Ms. Pritchard. Mr. Waddell.
Here.
Mr. Whitaker. Powhatan County, Mr. Byerly.
Here.
Mr. Hall. Mr. Cox.
Here.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That concludes the roll call.
Thank you. We do have a quorum. I do want to just note for everybody, our Henrico colleagues are attending their State of the County address this morning, so that's why they're not present. Also, I want to welcome Bill Cox joining us for his first meeting, supervisor from Powhatan County. So everybody, please welcome Bill. Our deepest condolences. Also, I want to turn it over to Ms. Heater, who has an introduction to make as well.
Yes, I just wanted to share with you all that we have a new employee who's seated down next to Mr. Addison, Gilbreth Gogel. She's a new administrative assistant who will be supporting myself as well as Mr. Parsons. So you will likely see her on emails and correspondence. And as you get to know her in the coming months, I hope you will welcome her. And she has already gotten to know many members of local government staff through email anyway. And we're just really glad that she's joined our team. So.
Welcome. Thank you for joining us. All right. At this time, we will call for public comments. So if there are members of the public who are with us who would like to give us their best 3 minutes at this time, we would be happy to hear it.
Did not receive any.
Okay. No one seems to be present, and we didn't receive any requests to speak. So we will move to our next item, which is the consent agenda. Has everybody received a copy of the agenda and had an opportunity to review it? And is there a motion? So moved. Sean Davis.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. Mr. Spoonhour, any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed, like sign. Right. All right. At this time, we have our standing committee and other reports. We have just concluded an executive committee meeting that was rather lengthy on the topic of our new leasing space. Yes.
Okay, sorry.
Yes, sir. And so at this time, there is a recommendation from the executive committee to move forward, to have a second date, if you will, with 3 locations. And this is out of a universe that was, I think, at one point over 20 and now has been winnowed down to 8. And then now the executive committee has recommended that we have staff move forward with 3 locations and to also authorize some preliminary work with Tallheimer as to what our build-out needs are going to be so that we can have those discussions and bring something back to this body that it can consider. This will also include a full breakdown of all costs for the best deal that these 3 locations that would host us for the coming at least 5, 10, probably maybe even longer than that years are going to give us. So we're going to be recommending that to you at this time. Martha, do you have anything to add to that?
No, thank you. Great job.
Sure. As a corollary, we have some items that we did not get to during the last discussion. I do want to turn that over to Martha this time, and it starts with future meetings and remote participation in those meetings.
Yes, thank you. So I'll make 2 announcements. One, first and foremost, for anyone who is online participating as an attendee, if you are a commissioner and you are supposed to be on the panelist side to interact with us, please raise your hand so that staff can know to move you over. Similarly, we have moved some of our other special guests for today over to the panelist line. So if you're a member of the PHA board or the PHA project selection committee, feel free to raise your hand and we can move you over to be recognized later in the agenda. On that note, as many of you know, we are nearing the end of the calendar year, which coincides with the end of the state of emergency declaration from the city of Richmond, which is the authorizing action that has permitted members of public bodies in the city of Richmond to participate in meetings virtually or remotely. So just wanted to alert everyone, and I will ask Mr. Gregory at this time to share what that means to you coming in January and what we understand the future of these circumstances might be.
Thank you, Ms. Cedar. Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. The virtual capabilities and attendance provisions that are permissible under the Declaration of Emergency will expire at the end of this calendar year. So as of December 31st, the City of Richmond's Declaration of Emergency will be coming to an end. That means that the fairly wide open virtual participation allowances under the Code of Virginia will also expire, okay? Because unless you're in a state of emergency, you don't have that greater flexibility. So what that will then mean is that members can continue to participate virtually, but only under certain conditions allowed under FOIA. Okay, so it's under Virginia Code Section 2.2-3708.2 of FOIA. Okay, so you can, if you have a personal illness that requires you to participate remotely, or a member of your family has an illness that requires you to participate remotely, you can do so under the policy approved by this body, and I believe that's in place already. A couple of years ago, we put that in place. And you can participate remotely for personal reasons to a certain extent throughout the year. So if you have a personal matter, whether that be a family matter or you're on vacation or a business travel or something like that, if it's a personal matter, you can participate remotely with the permission of the body, but you can only do that for 2 meetings a year or for up to 25% of the total annual meetings within that year. Okay. So you can do that, but just be aware there are limitations. If you have questions about that, I'm happy to discuss them with you individually or as a group. But that's where we're going as of January 1, 2022. Okay, so everyone should plan to participate in person, if at all possible. The body will continue to live stream its meetings on the internet platforms that it has developed over the past couple of years. So public participation will continue. And so people will be able to stream them, be able to provide public comment via the online platforms. But participation of members will need to be in person or virtually under those limited circumstances, okay? So please bear that in mind. Does anybody have any questions?
Right. And I will ask you, Mr. Gregory, if you will also cover local appointments and the alternates. You did send out a memo. Everybody should have received a copy of that memo as to our bylaw change and how jurisdictions can designate proxy voting. And so I'd like you to cover that if you would, please.
Sure. So a memo was distributed to you all. This issue was discussed in great detail throughout the course of the charter amendment process that we underwent over the past 2 years. Your local legal counsel was part of that discussion and part of the development of the charter amendments and part of the discussion with regard to this memorandum. Rough drafts of this legal memorandum were distributed to local legal counsel. They had the opportunity to provide input, to discuss it, or to express concerns or anything of that sort. The memorandum was put into final form, was shared with the chair and staff. And so this is the final draft, and it expresses my views on the use of alternates to represent your member jurisdictions and how the votes are cast that your member jurisdictions have. Okay, so each member jurisdiction has a set of votes that it can allocate to the member representatives. Okay, there has been, in the history of PlanRVA, there's been a desire to make sure that there's full representation of all the member jurisdictions, but at the same time, over the recent years, it gets pretty daunting for members for Henrico County or Chesterfield or even Ashland to send all of its full delegation to a meeting. So there was a desire, as we went through the charter amendment process, to allow jurisdictions to allocate their votes or aggregate their votes into one or more members that would be representing the locality, right? So we built a structure in the charter amendments to allow for that. And that is consistent with the code, with the Regional Cooperation Act, which governs planning district commissions. The Regional Cooperation Act allows for the aggregation of votes, okay? But to be clear, the body needs to understand who has the voting capacity, who holds the votes, what voting seats are they casting, and who is representing the locality. So for instance, a locality, if they have 5 voting seats, let's say, they could aggregate those voting seats to a sole representative that is representing that locality on the body. So for instance, member A could be casting 5 votes for his jurisdiction. A member jurisdiction could also say, we want 2 representatives and one is going to cast 3 votes and one is going to cast 2 votes, or one is going to have 4, one is going to have 1. However you want to aggregate those votes or divide those votes among your representatives is fine, as long as that is made clear to the body. The Regional Cooperation Act also allows an alternate to be designated by the member jurisdiction who can represent one of the members on the body if they can't make a meeting. For instance, Mr. Baca is here because he is the alternate for Henrico County, and he's here to represent the county in lieu of Ms. O'Bannon, I believe. And that can occur as long as it's clear who that alternate is. There has been discussion over the past couple of years about whether you can have a floating alternate who can represent any of the member representatives, or whether it's an alternate who is tied to a particular representative. And in consultation with local legal counsel, the understanding based upon the language in the code is that a member jurisdiction can appoint an alternate to represent a member of the body, okay, that is serving as the locality's representative. So the understanding is that it is not a floating alternate, that the member jurisdiction has to say that, okay, member A is going to represent our body, and they're going to have the authority to cast 3 votes, or 4, or 5. And member A's alternate is going to be Mr. X. So if member A cannot attend, Mr. X is going to come in and he's going to cast that vote. That is not a proxy, however, because Mr. X can come in and he has the full authority that member A had to cast those votes. And he may cast them in a way that member A doesn't necessarily agree with, because the alternate has the same voting authority as the appointed member, right? And he or she can vote those votes anyway. Now, they can discuss it ahead of time and figure out what they want to do. But when it comes right down to it, those votes are cast by the member or by the alternate at the meeting in person. And part of the reason why that is the rule that I see is that the Freedom of Information Act only allows for the public body to take action by votes, by members of the body at a public meeting. Okay, so you can't, it doesn't allow for proxies, if you will. Now, proxies and alternates, I understand there's an understanding where those might be seen as the same thing, but I want to be careful because they're really not, in my view. A proxy, so you all own stock, right, or in certain companies. You may get a proxy to vote in a board of directors meeting or a shareholder meeting or whatever. And you say, I want, on issues X, Y, and Z, I want to vote A, B, and C. And then you mail that in, or you give that to someone, and they cast that on your behalf. They're your proxy. Whereas an alternate is not a proxy. You don't tell the alternate, I want you to vote this way, vote aye on item A. And that's all the authority that person has, is to cast that vote the way you told them to cast it. Whereas an alternate is a representative in lieu of that member, and they have the full authority to vote according to their conscience and according to their policy decision at that meeting, okay? So it's a matter of authority that this person has to cast votes. So I want to just make sure everybody's clear that an alternate is not the same thing as a proxy, in my view, and that the alternates have the authority that's designated to them by their governing body, just as any other member.
And so, and just to clarify, Mr. Gregory, individual governments, we would basically by resolution then say who is carrying what votes here, if they're carrying a number of votes, or set the alternate member in this case. We would do that by resolution in our own localities as members of this organization.
That's correct. So the idea is when your governing bodies meet in January at your organizational meetings, and you make your various appointments to the other bodies that you all serve upon, all the regional bodies, local committees, whatever. We request that you communicate those appointments back to the Planning Commission so that it's clear what authority is held by each member sitting around this table come January 1 or February, whenever the next meeting is. So sometimes that can be done by resolution. by your governing body, and you all set forth very specifically, our representatives are going to be Miss A and Mr. B, and Miss A is going to have this authority, and Mr. B is going to have this authority, and our alternate is for Mrs. A is going to be Miss X or whatever, sorry to get too complicated here, but anyway, so it's clear. So everybody knows what authority is held by whom. Now that it could be by resolution, it could be by a motion that is passed, as long as it's communicated, preferably in writing, back to the commission staff, so we know who's doing what and who has what authority. That would be greatly appreciated, just to keep everybody square and everything. Yes, ma'am.
I just was gonna say, it's our intention in the new year to communicate with for lack of a better word, a worksheet. Not intended to be necessarily prescriptive for the jurisdiction, because it is your local decision how you want to be represented, but just to aid in providing the requested information. So we'll be working through executive committee members, but mostly through your local government administrators' offices to make sure that staff, and again, we do not have a preference on the form, provided that it's just provided to us. So however your local government is required to take action on such matters is what we accept. This is intended to be as flexible for your benefit as possible.
That's right. Sometimes we get a letter from the county administrator or the city manager or town manager who says the town council voted and they designated, ABC, and that's perfectly adequate, but as long as it's.
Questions from Mr. Gregory, Mr. Peterson?
Just a clarification, each jurisdiction is only allowed one alternate, is that correct?
That's correct. And so if member doesn't appear and alternate doesn't appear, those votes cannot be cast. Okay?
Just clarifying that.
Right.
The other thing I think that would be helpful to know is that you can change this up. That nobody can attend a certain meeting. It's important. Y'all can pass a new resolution in your locality, get the county administrator, send it over, good to go. So, yes, Ms. Page.
Excuse me. So, Mr. Chair, my understanding is, in New Kent, we did a resolution. So you asked us to do another resolution. I mean, I'm quite sure we already did one for this.
If your appointment was made coterminous with your service of being an elected official, then it stands. So it's only dependent, the different localities appoint their members for different periods of time. So
And y'all stuck with
I'll
me,
follow
so
up
we're
with each of the jurisdictions individually.
Condolences.
Yeah, that's true. So exactly right. So some jurisdictions say, Ms. Page, you're the person for planning for the PlanRVA for your entire term. Some jurisdictions say you're going to you're going to be the appointee for PlanRVA for 1 year, and then they redo it every January. It just depends, as long as it's clear.
All right. Question, Mr. Waddell.
The alternate is for a designated member. Could our resolution say that our alternate is for any, I understand no floating, but I'm trying to get around that with it. If our alternate could be the alternate for the one that's going to be absent, could our resolution say that? And therefore work around it?
Well, with respect, no. And that's a great question, because it is a defined point. Our view is that, or the consensus among the local legal counsel developed over the past couple of years, is that the code says a member jurisdiction can appoint an alternate to represent a member, not any member, not any of the members, not any members who happen to be absent at a meeting. It's a member. So, Mr. Waddell, you're an alternate for whomever, I'm not quite sure, but you're a member. You're not the alternate for anybody from your jurisdiction who can't happen to, or it happens that they can't make the meeting. It's not a floating alternate, right? So just to be clear.
All right, we need to move on, but I'll do one more.
Just one real quick. Are there any requirements for the alternates if there are those at the local level or are they by the body, i.e. needs to be an elected official or be staff?
Only elected officials are entitled to have alternates on the body.
But the
But the alternate
alternate.
itself.
The alternate is required to be an elected official as well.
Thank you.
That's good.
Which-
Thank you for that question.
Sorry, just to belabor.
Yeah.
Mathematically has been impossible for some jurisdictions prior to this charter amendment. So this has attempted to resolve some of the inherent challenges with our structure.
And that's correct. And while at the same time, we had to, the direction that we received was to make sure that the decision makers sitting around the table, the majority of the votes to be cast were going to be cast by elected officials, not staff members. Okay, so you can have staff members from your jurisdictions as members of the body, but they only have, say, one vote apiece. Only elected officials can cast multiple votes, okay? Only they can hold aggregated voting authority, all right? Because that's the policy decision that was made in direction. So I think I've covered everything.
Thank you, Mr. Gregory. And should your local council have questions, please reach out to Mr. Gregory for further guidance.
One more quick comment, and you mentioned this. If throughout the year, your governing bodies want to make a change in the appointments, they can do that as long as it's done by whatever method you all want to make it clear, by motion, by resolution. It needs to be done by an act of your governing body to change the representation on the planning commission. As long as that's clear and communicated effectively, then it's fine.
Thank you. All right, and I'm going to ask Martha to cover one scheduling item and then our Audit, Facilities, and Finance Committee's report in the absence of Mr. Holland.
Okay, thank you.
I think the first thing you talked about was the executive committee authorizing, I think that's just a financial.
I think
Authorize the expenses that the staff needed for that.
I think we do. And we can, I think we can cover that. I want to, if we can hold that, but I think we will get it on this agenda.
Thank you. Just as Mr. Winslow noted, you took action, this body took action earlier this year to set a schedule for the fiscal year. And so January's meeting is not on the calendar. Therefore, prior to the typically scheduled second Thursday of the month, you will receive a cancellation notice. You do not have to do anything today to put that into effect, but just wanted to remind you that we typically do not hold a regular meeting in January so that your local governments can make their changes as necessary. So we will plan to see the full commission back in February. I will note that from the executive committee's discussion this morning, it's likely that there will be a special meeting of the executive committee later in the month in January to be able to make sure that we are prepared to come back in February with a recommendation with regard to office space leasing. Move on if you're ready.
Please.
As Chairman Winslow said, Mr. Holland, who chairs the Audit, Facilities, and Finance Committee, was not able to be here this morning. And so I wanted to share with you that the committee who did meet on November 23rd, we have some members of that committee that are here this morning who I would invite to chime in. But we do have before you in the packet the FY 2021 financial audit. Mr. Rhodes from Dunham, Occamp and Rhodes PLC, our auditing firm, did present those statements and the summary of findings. And that report returned with an unqualified opinion, which means that there were no findings or concerns identified through the audit process. This has been circulated for your review, and I would invite members of the Audit, Facilities, and Finance Committee to chime in if you have any questions or concerns, but we are asking for an action today to accept the financial statements and audit report from fiscal year 2021.
Everybody had a chance to review that statement. Are there questions at this time? Mr. Waddell.
Yes, sir. I've got several.
Okay.
I'll go page by page. Page 13, deferred rent liability. Is that leasehold improvements by the lessor that we are back?
Those are the actual payments remaining on the term of our lease. So we make a monthly lease payment, and that is the balance that is still due through the end of October of 2022.
Thank you. I've got a few more.
I hope that they're all straightforward like that.
Page 15 of 74, under revenues, special assessment. Okay, I've done a little research. That is for capitalizing the reserve fund. Am I correct?
I'm sorry, tell me again
I'm
which
sorry.
page
Page 15.
of the packet?
Sorry.
Yeah,
a smaller
under the
number.
audit. Page, it's got page 15 and page 9 on it. And under revenues, under that, other revenues and special assessment, is that for refunding of the $1 million special,
Yes, it is.
reserve fund?
Yes, it is. So you'll see in 2021 and 2020, those numbers vary slightly. That's because actually the majority of localities contributed 2 years, their 2 years worth of that special assessment to recapitalize the fund balance in 2020. And 2021 was just the remainder of that special assessment.
To
You're
bring it
correct.
Over $1 million.
That's correct.
Thank you. I didn't know, when is the mid-year budget review scheduled, or have we scheduled that?
The finance committee will take a look at the mid-year evaluation at their January meeting, and then that will come in all likelihood to the February board meeting.
Thank you. I'm going to skip down to page 18 of 74. I'm online, but I think it's Rutherford County Standards Forward 68 adjustment. Is that just a line item to recognize or move monies because we're a fiduciary as opposed to a direct employer?
GASB 68 is described at length in the notes to the financial statements as well, and it is with regard to treatment of the pension programs and pension liabilities for the agencies. This is a newer reporting requirement for public bodies, and can be difficult to understand and interpret year to year because those adjustments are provided through an actuarial analysis, and they're provided on a lag. And so those adjustments are provided to us, and then they are there. So they are real in the sense that they are a liability that the agency holds for the life of our pension participants. However, they are called out distinctly in the financial statements because they do not have an impact on this current fiscal year's operating bottom line. So it's an attempt to be in better full disclosure of the agency's liabilities, but recognize that they are not due in a current or a near future timeframe.
Thank you. A couple seconds.
I wish Mr. Holland were here for that one. He's the accountant, but.
Okay, I've got just a few more. Page 26. Page 26, it's note 2, grants receivable, and it's the last one, miscellaneous of 16,847. A small number, but the other grants I understand. What is the miscellaneous grant?
I will need to do research on that to find out. My best guess is it is actually a sum of some smaller pieces that get pulled together, but I can get that itemized for you.
In the future, I'll do my homework a little bit on
No
it.
problem.
But
It's nice to know that our members read the audit. This is great. Thank
I
you.
actually live for this, but I don't have cable TV. Sorry.
I'm sorry.
Up to page 44. Sorry. Variance, it's titled Schedule of Revenues and Expenses, and it's under revenues, and it's total revenues line, the variance of 811,709. And the print denotes unfavorable. Help me understand that. Is that timing of revenues, or Why the variance so large?
Sure. So the final budget, you can see in that second column was 2.8 million thereabouts, and the actual revenue, at least in the federal grants line, because that's where the bulk of that variance sits, is in the actual was just at 2 million. So that the bulk of the 811,000 that you're talking about was really in the federal grants, and you're right, it is a timing issue. So we have multi-year federal grants that oftentimes will carry over into the future fiscal year. So it is not a representation of opportunity lost. It's a representation of how much did we predict that we would be expending in the fiscal year and how much actually was expended and drawn down for reimbursement. So monies carry over. Each federal grant that we have a different set of rules about how they carry over. Some carry continuously into the next fiscal year, others skip. So it just depends on the nature of the contract that we have.
That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. So we need a motion to accept.
Please.
We need a motion to accept the audit. So moving as well, thank you.
Second.
Thank you, all in favor?
Aye.
Like sign. And then I think we need a motion to accept the financial statements.
Yes, also in your packet are provided the first quarter financial statements for this fiscal year. These were also reviewed by the Finance Committee with the recommendation to accept the statements as provided.
Is there a motion?
So move it.
Is there a second? Thank you. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Sign opposed?
Mr. Chairman, can I make a statement, please?
Yes, sir.
I'd like to commend Ms. Heater for being on her game. You see, you're very good. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Cook.
Well, she answered all of those questions very well. Didn't she? We appreciate that. Well, very good. All right, we are now down to public outreach, and I'll turn it over to Mr. David.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In the packet right after the financial statements is a brief PowerPoint presentation. It starts on page 60. That pretty much gives a snapshot of where we are right now, focusing on brand and brand strategies, like as we reported last month. I'm not going to go through the whole presentation, but it gives you a really good summary of the team that we hired, the focus of their work, and the schedule and budget, which I will talk about in a couple minutes. But one point I wanted to make, which is on page 6, I think it really succinctly sort of puts together what we're looking for. A lot of the conversations we've had around this table, a lot of conversations I've had about branding and strategies and stuff like that, sometimes it's sort of misunderstood, but I'm going to read one statement which I think really sums things up well. What we're looking for out of this is to provide a succinct story for the organization that inspires employees, constituents, and partners. I think it's really a great snapshot of what we're hoping that at the end of this process, not only can the employees articulate, we can articulate, and people out in the community can articulate what this organization is about. So I think they really sort of phrase things up very, very well. The next page actually shows you the schedule and the 4 phases, or 3 phases that we're working under. Phase 1, discovery and internal immersion has been done. That's where a lot of the internal stakeholder conversations were. Many of you were interviewed by this team. Right now, we're in the process of phase 2, the external perspective in data gathering, and we're actually have scheduled a lot of those interviews, and most of those should be completed hopefully by the end of the calendar year, end of this month. We know it's the holidays, but we're trying to get a lot of those in. And then our next step as a committee will be to come together in January, and we're going to have the results of those 2 data gathering tasks presented to our committee. And then we'll work together with the consultants to start moving into phase 3. And ultimately to finish this work over the course of a 12-month schedule or 12-week schedule. Probably a couple weeks behind in that overall schedule, but it's to no fault of anybody except the scheduling. But we hope to sort of get things back on schedule in the first quarter.
Just as a show of hands, how many people have done that branding interview? I want to put my hand up here. Several of us. Good. How many people are yet to do it and are scheduled to do it? Okay. Great. Great. Please do that, and that will help us greatly. Thank you for your work on that. Any questions for Mr. Davey or comments? Great. All right. And now for our executive director's report.
Thank you. I'll just call attention to the materials that were provided. I think they were linked on the website. The intergovernmental and environmental reviews are there for reference. There's no action on those. I did just want to take the liberty to announce to everyone that we do have a holiday luncheon scheduled for December 16th, next week on Thursday. I would invite any member of the commission who is in the neighborhood and would like to pop by. There will be, I think, a variety of options to indulge that day. From a food perspective, we're actually hosting the Emergency Management Alliance annual holiday celebration that morning, and they do like a breakfast potluck, and then we'll be moving right into the staff luncheon. So we will have more than enough, I can assure you, if you'd like to stop by, but I know the staff would love to be able to spend a few minutes with you if you have time. Other than that, we're just really grateful for the support and the engagement of commission members this year. I want to take a little bit of time to acknowledge our staff members who have continued to just work tremendously hard. We met some really exciting milestones last week in support of the Central Virginia Transportation Authority. Many of you probably saw the media coverage about the first round of funding obligations. So there's a project that will be funded through regional revenues for each of the 9 jurisdictions. We have a very exciting announcement on this agenda later this morning with our affordable housing program in partnership with Virginia Housing and Partnership for Housing Affordability. We received 8 new grants through the Emergency Management Alliance earlier this winter with the governor's announcement, or this fall with the governor's announcement. So that is the efforts of Katie Moody and the members of the Emergency Management Alliance who have exceeded yet again year over year the funding that they bring into the region. And our environmental program is bigger than it's ever been before as well. And so we're just really pleased with the work that our staff members are doing, and wanted to say thanks to them for all that they do.
Wonderful. Wonderful. And the only other, I'm just going to move one item and just put other business before our special program, and that is, as many of you know, a huge topic of conversation has been on our lease and where we're going to be and build out and all of that. And so the executive committee met earlier this morning and reviewed the information that has been teed up by both Martha and our agent with Tallheimer, and there was a unanimous recommendation to move forward on with 3 of the properties for further discussion to bring back to this body and to authorize any necessary expenses to be able to get to flesh out the best offer. And that those expenses might include what our build out costs might be. So we just need to be able to provide them with that detail. And so I do think, because that involves some authorization to move forward with our partner in Tallheimer to authorize those expenses, we would need a motion in front of this body. I think Mr. Peterson's note was correct on that. And so would ask for any discussion or motion at this time on that item.
The executive committee probably.
Right, let you adopt, if you want to adopt it here.
So moved, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Dr. Newbill. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion on that item? Wonderful.
I do have one question.
Please.
Apologize, I wasn't there.
Ms. Vannon, thank you.
Where does the 3 locations? Can you just mention those?
We have them, and if it's okay, I'm going to share those with you afterwards.
Okay.
If that's all right.
I just want to know.
Sure. Yes.
Maybe just noting, it came up in the executive committee that these costs are necessary for us to have an accurate representation of what it's going to cost to move and to do the build out. So it's in my opinion, a good investment of the funds to make sure we are making the best decisions possible.
And Mr. Davis is going to provide those to you right now, Ms. Van.
I just so that in full disclosure, I'd be happy to send out a communication under confidential cover, but we've intentionally tried to make sure that to preserve our negotiating position, we're not broadcasting this information just so that we can maintain that. So that's why we're saying that way.
Yeah, don't mean to be Mr. Mystery up here. So thank you. Thank you for that discussion. All right. All in favor? Any opposed? Thank you. And now we'll turn to our special program.
Thank you so much. In October, this board took action to name the Partnership for Housing Affordability as our implementation partner for the $3 million housing grant award that was made by Virginia Housing in July. And I'm just really excited, one, to be able to so soon come back with an update, but we have a number of recognitions that I want to make, and I probably will not be able to name everybody, but we have a number of people here in the room today that have been working on this effort fiercely, some of whom will address you. Also, we have a number of people that are online. I will point out Annette Cousins, who chaired the project selection committee for Partnership for Housing Affordability, and we'll have other representatives that can be identified. But Mr. Winslow, if you'd like, I think we can do an introduction of our special guests and get on with the presentation. Okay. So we have representatives from this morning from Virginia Housing and from Partnership for Housing Affordability. And if you wouldn't mind, I think you'll meet Sid up at the front of the room. Devon, who has your PowerPoint presentation queued up. And then I think, Susan, we would love to have you give some remarks early on and recognize members of the team that are here tonight.
Like us to be.
Please, right up here at the front. Sid, if you can kind of raise your hand for where they should stand. Our microphones are in the ceiling and they are in the middle of the room. And so we want to make sure that you are in a place where people can hear you. So please, Javon, behind the podium is too far away. So please, please right here in front of the table. Yes.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, good. Well, it is certainly a pleasure to be with all of you this morning. And we're very excited at Virginia Housing to be talking about this new initiative. I'm here today with my colleagues, Monique Johnson, and also Chris Thompson, who are with our Community Outreach Division. You know, we are very committed. I don't know if everybody's familiar with Virginia Housing, but we're the state's housing finance agency, and we're celebrating our 50th anniversary this coming year. And the nice thing is we're able to do what we do without any state appropriations. So we run like a business, but with a very important public mission, and that's all about housing. So one of the things that we've done is we've gone around the state and worked with planning district commissions is we've for years been able to work with them, and I know with the Partnership for Housing Affordability, on things like capacity building and doing regional housing analysis and community impact grants. But we wanted to do something more because we know one of the biggest issues right now is there's simply not enough housing available, and that's both in home ownership and rental. And we also know that the planning district commissions are so critical because one, it's a way to cover the entire state, and it's also a way to get regional conversations about housing. And that's so important, we think, to look at housing as a regional initiative. So we are just in the process of launching, as we'll talk about today, a new $40 million grant that's coming from our own Virginia Housing Resources, and that will be spread around all of the planning district commissions. And the idea is to be able to get new units produced. And we appreciate that all of you will bring your voices about what is needed in the Richmond region together so that it can be addressed through the Partnership for Housing Affordability. So we would really like to thank PlanRVA for putting this together, for inviting us here today. And we are just excited to work with you in any way we can through technical assistance or certainly with this grant program. So thank you very much. And I will turn it over to Laura Lafayette.
So I'm Laura Lafayette, and for a couple more weeks, I am serving as the Executive Director of the Partnership for Housing Affordability. The partnership is a nonprofit that is operated out of the Richmond Association of Realtors. And I say in just a couple of weeks because in a couple of weeks, while I will retain my position at RAR, are. I'm pleased to announce that Javon Burton will be our executive director of the partnership come January 1st. I really believe in next generation leadership, and you have to walk that talk, and we're going to be in such great hands with Javon. And I just get to go back on the board and serve with Martha and lots of other folks. And it's been, what I love about the partnership is we take that word really seriously. At the table said nonprofits, for-profits, and public officials. And we've really built that trust over so many years. And I'm grateful to so many folks sitting around the table that you allow the staffs of your localities to serve with us. We have a number of those folks here. I know Eric Lebo, who's with Henrico, Dan Cohen serves from Chesterfield, Mike Maloney serves from Hanover, and I could go on and on. And we just have worked so well together. I'm really grateful for PlanRVA. Because Martha's reached out and said, look, we don't need to reinvent the wheel here. Let's work with the partnership. We have been able very, very quickly. I think this was announced like in June or July. And we're here today to be able to announce, Javon will talk about the grant process and then announce the recipients of the award. And we are so excited to get to work. I mean, that's the next step. So again, thank you for allowing us to partner with you all to demonstrate that when we work together and we collaborate, we can very efficiently do good work on behalf of the citizens of this region. So again, thank you, Mr. Chairman, all of you around the table, and Javon, now you get to do the fun stuff.
Thank you, and thank you to Virginia Housing for this opportunity. So I'm Javon Burton with Partnership for Housing Affordability. I'm just going to briefly go over the process for this program and how we arrived at some of those decisions and talk about what the next steps are. So for those of you who do not know, this program was launched in about July of this year. $40 million was spread across the state. So all the PDCs in Virginia and the Richmond region was allocated $3 million, the highest amount based on population. So the purpose of this is to help promote regional strategies for housing and how we can create opportunities that otherwise would not have existed. So just to give you an idea of what the scope of this program is to create new units here in the region. So whether that's by new construction or acquisition and rehab of vacant units or even adaptive reuse of existing structures, but to create at least 30 new units with the funds that were provided. And so I think you'll see a little later on how we're doing or how we intend to do on that goal. But I think it's a testament to how well our region is, particularly with our nonprofit providers. So the focus of this program is to really help create first-time home ownership for lower income buyers, also to create opportunities in rural areas and places that typically don't have as much opportunity to produce this kind of housing. And so we wanted this to really be a show of regionalism because it serves our entire PlanRVA footprint. So this was an opportunity for us to spread equitably across the region, single family and multifamily housing. And the beautiful thing about this program is that Virginia Housing really left it up to each PDC region to figure out what their priorities are and to figure out what makes most sense for them, for each jurisdiction. And so I think we were able to come to a consensus on we have a good balance of single family and multifamily projects that we can develop over the next 3 years. I say 3 years because this is a timeline of having all of the units completed and habitable by July 1, 2024. So we really wanted to emphasize projects that were close to being shovel ready, that had the necessary zoning or building permits so that we wouldn't run into any issues with feasibility. You'll also see that there's a lot of flexibility in this program, given the unpredictability of development. Construction costs have increased considerably. There's a lot of different eligible expenses with this program, and that can be soft costs, it can be construction costs, it can even be project-specific marketing. But we really wanted to enable our nonprofit partners in particular. I keep mentioning them because we're one of the only regions, if not the only one, that restricted this program just to our nonprofit housing developers. We thought that this region has already a well-built nonprofit capacity. And so we wanted to maximize on that and expand the pipeline that those folks have. For the funding, we decided it was best to split up the funding into two pools, so a large jurisdiction pool and a small jurisdiction pool. The small pool was allocated $700,000 and consisted of Goochland, Hanover, Town of Ashland, New Kent, Powhatan, and Charles City. And so we really wanted for the smaller jurisdictions to compete against projects that were in comparable jurisdictions. So all applications submitted for the small pool, they were only being ranked and scored and deliberated upon within that pool. And then for the large pool, they were just being scored and competing against other applications submitted within that pool. So for the largest jurisdiction, we have Chesterfield County and Henrico County and the city of Richmond, which is allocated $2 million. So once we did that, we released our applications. We put a cap and a floor on the amounts that folks could request. So for multifamily projects, the most that you could request was $500,000. The lowest that you could request was $40,000. We really wanted to make sure that we were having considerable impact with the allocations that we were making. We didn't want to sprinkle just a little bit of money in each development because that wouldn't be helpful to a lot of our nonprofit partners. So for single family, folks could submit requests that were about $50,000 per unit up to a max of $500,000. So we wanted to do it on a per unit basis on the single family side and not judge single family and multifamily on the same. Mentioned earlier, some of our criteria for selecting these projects, feasibility really had a lot to do with it. So projects that had their zoning approved and already had their building permits in place were really prioritized. Projects that had a very critical and specific gap. This funding is not going to fund an entire development, but it can serve as critical gap financing. And so we wanted to ensure that projects that do have very specific gaps that need to be filled, it could be filled with this project. In addition to looking at things like equity and innovation, is this something that is new? Does it include a unique partnership? What's the building quality of it? So we looked at all of those things in order to inform our scoring and our decisions. The review panel was, as mentioned earlier, comprised of folks from lending institutions, some of our local government representatives who provided critical insight on would this fit within the zoning that it's proposed in? Is this even buildable? In addition to having philanthropy at the table, given their experience with ranking and scoring applications. So that group met on the 16th, made the recommendations, and then just last week, the PHA board approved the recommendations that you will see here. So with the small pool, we were able to award 5 projects across the small pool jurisdictions. We have 2 in Powhatan County, 16 Old Tavern Road and an ADU pilot, both are by Habitat for Humanity. In Powhatan, it would be 1 unit apiece and $50,000 apiece for those projects. And then in Ashland and in Hanover, both by Hanover and King William, Habitat for Humanity, 2 new construction builds, single family, that would be $50,000 a piece. And so the last one is in Goochland by Habitat for Humanity. Goochland clearly a strong showing in the small pool from the Habitat community, but that would be 2 units in Goochland County for $200,000. So a pretty good balance here across our smaller jurisdictions. We had 19 total applications that were submitted in nearly every single jurisdiction in our region. So I think that this is a testament to this program being a great opportunity for nonprofits to take advantage of and to create housing that otherwise would not have happened without this program. For the larger pool, we were able to allocate funding for 7 different projects. The first of which is Kool-Aid Apartments, which is in Henrico County. That'll be 86 units, multifamily, a permanent supportive housing. And they had a very specific gap that they needed to be filled. And so we were able to fully fund their request of $466,872. The next is the Churchill partnership by Project Homes. And that's a partnership actually with Urban Hope, who will do the property management there. But that is rental units in the city of Richmond to serve lower income households, an allocation of $300,000. And then the Colebrook Motel, which is in Chesterfield County. That's a very innovative project. It's the largest application that we had submitted, be 147 units. They requested $400,000 and we're able to get that full allocation. The next project is also in Chesterfield County by Mackie Walker Community Land Trust. This would be 10 single-family homes on a former annex site in which they have been working on, and it's again a pretty innovative project, and it's also a great opportunity for the Land Trust to expand its capacity and how many units it's doing at a time. That would also be allocated $400,000. And then the last two are by Richmond Metropolitan Habitat for Humanity, one in Chesterfield County to do 2 units at $83,000. And then the next would be scattered site projects across the city of Richmond, single family homes, 7 of those for $350,000. So as you'll see in this map, we were able to have a pretty good balance of development and allocations across the region, a mix of single family and multifamily. And I think I mentioned earlier that 30 unit goal that we had to hit with Virginia Housing Guidelines. Will do far more than that. And in fact, we were able to withhold about $250,000 and allocations for future allocation in the spring that we're going to reserve for our smaller jurisdictions to give some of those nonprofits more time to put together some detailed proposals and to figure out what we could do more in that part of the region. So just to give you an idea of our timeline and next steps, we're going to continue or begin to meet with some of these organizations at the beginning of the year. Every project will be at a different phase. So it'll be important to understand where they are in their timeline, what expenditures that they'll need reimbursement for and when, and get them ready for the claims process. And then in spring, we'll have the allocation of the remaining $250,000 to our smaller jurisdictions. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention, we are going to have a more public announcement of these allocations, in addition to having some visual renderings of those projects at our organization's State of Housing event January 20th. So encourage you all to attend. That will be a very exciting event in which we'll just talk about some of the updates that have happened in housing over the last year and outlook for 2022, get an update on the real estate market and what's happening there, and how those two will play with each other. And then we'll also have some special announcements in addition to these. So really looking forward to that event. If you all could attend, that would certainly be a great showing of regionalism. So I will open it up to any questions that we have, and thank you all for the time today.
Thank you, Yvonne, and thanks to all of our partners. Are there questions from this august body? Comments?
Chairman, I had one, going back to when you started, you mentioned that the ranch would be single family, $50,000, but you mentioned the $500,000 homes, and we call that, is that affordable housing?
So as far as what they could be reimbursed for the cost, we did not have any requests on the single family side that reached $500,000. But if you're looking at the cost of someone, needing funding for $50,000 a unit, and they're doing, 10 or 15 units, you can see how those requests get up to that amount.
Just the $500,000.
But it's
sort of throws me.
Yeah, it's not a house that's worth $500,000.
Fair question. Did I see? Yes, Mr. Coder.
You're a nonprofit, is that correct?
Yes.
And you are the executive director?
Soon to be.
Or soon to be the executive
The
director.
hard question, he's the executive.
Can you give us a little detail about the spring for the rural communities, please?
Yeah, so that decision was really based on the applications that we received. We received a few more in the smaller pool, but we thought it would be best because we gave folks a pretty quick turnaround to put their applications together, to just give them more time, to look at more detailed proposals, and also to do some more outreach so that we could solicit more applications from our smaller pool jurisdictions. So we'll work in the next few months on the outreach and kind of what we're expecting there, and put out some timelines as far as when applications will go out.
I would like to point out that, and I've said this a time or two, that I'm your special needs child in this room. Charles City County probably can't compete against the larger localities because we have very few shovel-ready projects. So I do appreciate that. Hopefully, as you said, there's flexibility amongst the smaller counties. So I hope that comes true. Thank you.
Yeah, and and I will say that shovel-ready was something we prioritized, but not all the applications we got were shovel-ready, and not all the ones that we funded were as shovel-ready, because we understand that reality. So.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Well, I certainly think this is a huge positive for the region. I think about all the families who will inhabit these homes and make our communities and neighborhoods better across the region. So I want to commend this partnership. I really publicly want to thank Martha for this effort and her team because what we did was we just had trust in our partners and then executed. And I think that's what you do when you have opportunities. So thank you so much for being such good partners in all of this. And Martha, do you have any comments?
I do. Yeah, I wanted to say from a staff perspective, Ken Lance, who I think is here, and Mark Bittner, who's not in the room, have been on our team, engaged with us and gearing up. So just wanted to acknowledge that. Ken's agreed to take on a new body of work that hasn't been part of his assignments before. And so we're really just grateful to him for what he's done so far and what he will be doing, because it's going to be a exciting opportunity. I also wanted to see if those that are in the room who are associated with this work could stand, just to be able to get a feel. This is not normal to have this many audience members, so I just wanted to say thank you. It's harder to see. We have a number of those folks that are either partners in the awards or participate through Partnership for Housing Affordability on the screen. So just again, thank you to the efforts of Javon in leading this effort, but also all the people that stand behind you, Javon, in this work. So thank you.
Appreciate you all very much. Is there any other business to come before this body? To entertain a motion. Move to adjourn. Second. Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. All opposed, like sign. Thank you very much and enjoy your holiday.
How are you?